Okay, so today's Mr. Ballen video has a tagline that says, "This soldier fought in the trenches for 30 years. 30 years straight? What does he mean? It's a Mr. Ballen video. It means somebody's dead." Right, okay. I am looking forward to this because we love Mr. Ballen's stories. And if you like his stories too, don't forget to subscribe to him. If you want to hang around here too and subscribe to me, I would appreciate it very, very much. Right, Mr. Ballen. See what you do to that damn like button, like I say every time.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
Truth stranger than fiction.
Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that all demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do.
Okay.
And we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and secretly glue 1 thumbtack upturned on the surface of their favorite chair. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Yes, subscribe to Mr.
Let's
Ballen.
get into today's stories.
The Last Fighter.
One morning in October, very late during World War II, a Japanese soldier named Lieutenant Hiro Onoda crept out of the jungle on a small island in the Philippines called Lubang and crouched down at the edge of a huge rice field. Another soldier named Kazuka came out of the jungle behind him, and together they carefully crawled toward these huge bundles of rice that had just been harvested by the local farmers.
Right.
And when they reached the first bundle, Onoda took 2 torches out of his bag. So when Onoda first arrived in Lubang, his mission had been to destroy the island's airfield, but everything had gone completely wrong. Allied forces, who were the enemy of the Japanese, had attacked the island, and the Japanese had evacuated. But by accident, they had left Onoda and Kozuka behind. And as far as they knew, there could be others who had been left behind as well, but as for right now, it was just those 2.
It's okay, you can send Rambo in to get him. Rambo's good at rescuing people.
But even though these 2 soldiers really had no idea if they would survive this, if they would ever get rescued or not, they still had a mission to do, and that was, to attack the enemy. And these bundles of rice, they knew were going to be sent to the other side to feed their enemy. And so they had to destroy them. So now Onoda lit the 2 torches, and then he and Kozuka set fire to the first bundle of rice. And then they took off running, stopping every few feet to set fire to another bundle of rice until the entire field was on fire. Gunshots rang out, and Onoda realized the enemy must have seen them.
Obviously,
so
because
he and
on
Kazuka
fire.
dropped their torches and they fled back into the jungle. Now, this pattern of attacking and sabotaging their enemy and then retreating back to the jungle where they could hide out was one they had done many, many times. It was sort of like the one thing that anchored their existence. They were actively still fighting the enemy until either they were killed or rescued. That was their North Star. Normally, they were quite good at this and they would be able to escape the enemy and get back to the jungle. But this time, as they were running away and Onoda's dodging bullets, literally, he heard Kozuka yell out behind him and then fall to the ground. A few weeks later, Onoda was alone, and he was patrolling the north side of the island. Kozuka had been shot and killed during their rice field sabotage, and so now Onoda was very likely the only Japanese soldier left on this island. And while Onoda knew, he was honor-bound to keep on fighting even by himself, which was obviously mentally much harder to do, by now he was just exhausted and depressed, living off banana peels and whatever else he could steal from local farmers. It was a pretty miserable existence.
Wow,
and also, ever since the Allied forces had killed Kazuka, they had somehow learned Onoda's name, and they'd stepped up their operations targeting him specifically. Onoda had had to leave the jungle and move into this underground cave he had found. But even there, he could still hear the sound of fighter jets flying overhead, clearly looking for him. And sometimes groups of enemy soldiers would patrol the jungle looking for him, which was near his cave, and they would call out for him by name and tell him to stop hiding and come on out.
As if you're gonna come out.
Continued his patrol, he heard voices. So naturally, he crouched down and hid behind a boulder. And soon, 3 enemy soldiers came into view, and they clearly had no idea that Onoda was watching them because their rifles were slung over their shoulders and they were just kind of joking around with each other. But Onoda still panicked because he knew pretty soon they would notice his footprints and they would track him to his hiding spot. So even though there was clearly a part of Onoda that was very ready to be done fighting this war, finally, even if it meant being captured, really. He still forced himself to raise his rifle, take aim, and fire. Months passed by, and Onoda knew it was very likely springtime, and it had been weeks since he had seen any enemy soldiers.
Oh, so he killed them then.
He was holed up in his underground cave, and he was reading a letter that he had saved from home. And then he heard movement overhead, and somebody above ground called his name. So instinctively, Onoda reached for his rifle, but before he could do anything like pop out of the cave and start shooting, the person who had called out began to speak. And Onoda realized he knew this voice, and it was not an enemy soldier at all.
Oh.
Onoda crawled out of the cave, and when he saw the person standing there who was speaking to him, he just began to weep. It was his commanding officer, who he had been waiting for all this time. Okay. And the commanding officer was walking toward him with a group of other soldiers, friendly soldiers. Onoda climbed to his feet and immediately saluted the officer and asked if he was finally allowed to go home. And the officer said yes, because it would turn out that the date was March 9th, 1974. World War II had ended 29 years earlier. Onoda...
What the fuck? He's been hiding out in a cave, living off the land and bananas and shit like that when he didn't have to. For 30 years. Well, 29 years. World War II ended in 1945, didn't it? Jesus Christ, man.
74. World War II had ended 29 years earlier. Onoda had spent almost 3 decades terrorizing not enemy soldiers, but Filipino farmers and villagers and police officers who he had simply mistaken for enemy troops because he believed they were still in this war. The Japanese government had thought Onoda and Kazuko were dead, but after Kazuko was killed and his body was recovered, Japan sent search parties out onto this island looking for Onoda.
To send the wars over.
Thought the searchers were basically enemies trying to capture him.
So he killed him.
Until he heard the voice of his old commanding officer. And at that point, he finally came out and laid down his arms. When Onoda finally returned to Japan, he received a hero's welcome, but it was sort of tainted because innocent lives were lost.
Definitely.
When he was on this island believing he was fighting a war. You know, in many ways, he was sort of terrorizing innocent people. He just didn't know it. And so the whole event was very sensitive, and ultimately Onoda went on to write an autobiography called No Surrender, and he would become a rancher and move to Brazil, where he would live until 2014, where he would die from heart failure.
Jesus. I mean, there's being stuck in the war and there's being stuck in the war, isn't there? You know what I mean? You live in a cave. I bet he stunk. I bet he stunk like crap and everything. Wow, living in a cave. 30 years. 30 years terrorizing farmers because no one's talked to him. People are looking for him to tell him the war's over and he's killing them. Savage. Name should be called Oh No. Wow, that was crazy.
BetterHelp.
The people who died were like not the people we thought was going to die. Thought Onoda was going to die. From Onoda to Oh No.
Around 11 p.m. on April 19th, 1958, a 22-year-old man named Frank Isco drove along a coastal road in Santa Cruz, California, with 2 of his friends inside of his pickup truck. The road they were on was called West Cliff Drive, and it was this beautiful, scenic street that went along a cliff right next to the ocean, so it's got this amazing view. However, as Frank drove, he really couldn't see very much because it was nighttime and the road didn't have any streetlights, so the view was kind of lost on him. Frank glanced over at his friends, but they were both half asleep, and Frank himself was also pretty close to nodding off. So all 3 of the guys were completely exhausted because that morning they'd driven 50 miles from their hometown to Santa Cruz, and then they'd spent all day outside at the beach. Now they were all anxious to get home.
Being at the beach all day makes you exhausted. Come on, you're having fun, you're relaxing, what's up with you?
And then they'd spent all day outside at the beach. Now they were all anxious to get home and just go to bed. Frank was especially ready to get home because his wife, Margaret, always waited up for him. And right now she was pregnant with their first child, so he really didn't want to keep her up all night. So Frank pressed his foot harder on the gas pedal and he zoomed along, enjoying the ocean view as much as he could see it, and also listening to the sound of the waves, and began thinking about his wife.
I think if he's putting his foot down on a windy road, he's going to get more accustomed to that ocean than he thinks.
Much as he could see it, and also listening to the sound of the waves, and began thinking about his wife. But as he drove along, he came up on this sharp curve in the road that he just hadn't seen because it was so dark out, and he was going so fast that when he hit the brakes, even though he began to slow down, he wasn't slowing down fast enough, and so he jerked his wheel trying to avoid what was going to happen here, but the truck, it spun out of control. Frank heard his friends wake up and start screaming, and Frank's desperately trying to will the car away from the edge of this road because there's a cliff down to the ocean, but it's like he just couldn't do it. The truck was spinning, and at the last second, he looked out his window and he saw his headlights were beaming off the metal barrier that kept you from going off the cliff.
Was like that.
And he knew there was nothing he could do. And they slammed into the barrier, and then he felt the truck lurch past the barrier, and all of a sudden, it's like they're weightless.
Yeah.
As he and his friends are falling off the cliff down to the ocean.
Wow.
In this split second, as they're literally falling off a cliff, Frank squeezed his eyes shut and just screamed along with his friends. And he expected at any moment that his truck was going to fall into the water, and water would pour in through the windows, and they would all just sink and drown. There'd be nothing they could do. But amazingly, Frank felt the truck slam into something that was unexpectedly hard. It clearly was not water. And suddenly they weren't falling anymore, and there was no water pouring into the truck. Frank was obviously disoriented from the impact and the darkness and all the confusion, and he really couldn't see what was going on.
He landed on a boat.
But he kind of checked himself, and he could tell like he was okay, and he looked over at his friends, and they too are completely shaken.
And he landed on a boat going fast.
Everybody's okay, at least physically. And so Frank kind of frantically asked them before they even figured out what was going on here, like, hey, are you guys good? And his friends are like, yeah, we're good. And then instinctively, one of his friends who was sitting on the passenger side of the car opened up the passenger side door and kind of carefully looked out to see what was going on here. And the friends sort of looked at the other two and just said, we're stuck on a ledge. We got caught on a ledge.
Oh.
For a second, all three of the friends just froze. It was almost like if we move too much, maybe the car will rock off the ledge and fall the rest of the way down.
I'd be jumping out as quick as I could.
But the friend kind of looked out again, and it seemed like they were actually stable on this ledge. Basically, by some miracle, they had only fallen maybe 20 feet down this cliff, hit this ledge, and stopped instead of careening all the way down to the ocean, which, would have likely been death.
Yeah.
Frank was so relieved and was so just amazed at their turn of luck in some ways that they had landed miraculously right here that he just started to laugh, because all they'd have to do now is just carefully climb out and flag down a motorist. The road was like 20 feet above them. They could definitely get to the road or at least signal somebody on the road, and they'd be okay. And so Frank's two friends, they climbed fully out of the truck and actually stood on the rocky ledge on the passenger side. They get out, they're standing there, they're kind of surveying the ocean, thanking their lucky stars that they've survived. And Frank, he wants to get out too, to join them.
Yeah.
But he decides to go out his door, open up his door and get out on the ledge that way. But as soon as he tried to open his door, he found it was stuck. And so instead, he just began rolling down his window and began climbing out. At the same time Frank was doing this, Frank's friends who were standing out on the ledge, they turned around to just look at him to see what he was doing. They could really only see, through the car, the shadowy shape of him in the darkness.
Yeah.
But they watched as he clearly was climbing out his window to presumably get out on the ledge and join them. But the instant he climbed out on the other side of the car, even though it was dark, they could sort of see him. The second he climbed out, it was like Frank just vanished. For a second, his friends were like, Frank, where'd you go? Like, where are you? But there was no response. And so carefully, the friends kind of walked around the truck to see what Frank was doing.
On the corner?
And when they saw what was on the other side of the truck, where Frank presumably landed when he jumped out of the truck, they were horrified. It would turn out the ledge that Frank and his friends had landed on, the one that had saved their lives, was not an entirely solid surface, or more specifically, it was porous. In particular, there was one hole, big enough for a person to fit through. And that hole was on the immediate outside of the driver's side of the truck. And that hole that Frank didn't see when he jumped out of the window and he fell into, that hole was the entrance to an underwater cave. And Frank, who survived the fall, is now in this dark cave. He has no idea what's happened, and he starts trying to figure out a way out. And there's all these tunnels going everywhere. There's a little bit of water in there, but it's not very deep. And he got lost inside of this cave, and his friends are calling out to him. Rescuers showed up, but
shit.
By the time the tide came in a couple hours later, Frank was nowhere near the entrance to the hole, so he couldn't let the water rise him up to the exit. He just had to wait for the water to fill in the space he was in, and he drowned.
Shit, the bed. I didn't see that coming. Why didn't you just climb over to the passenger side? I mean, American trucks and stuff are massive. Do you know what I mean? He should have just climbed over the passenger side where his mates was. I mean, how unlucky can you be? How unlucky can you be to find the only hole on the cliff? I mean, I know it was dark, but Jesus, can you imagine him stepping out and going, shit, I'm falling? Oh, I mean, I shouldn't laugh, he's dead, but I mean, Christ. Straight into it. I was thinking it's John Jones all over again. But then he said it's water. I was like, oh, God. Crazy, man. Crazy. People are dying in this. I thought the truth... Normally, the truth is stranger than fiction. Some of them don't die. But, yeah. The lone.
On the afternoon of December 19th, 1966, a 59-year-old man named Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim sat in a conference room inside of a government building in Cairo, Egypt. He was there as an employee of the Egyptian government, and he was sitting across from two governmental representatives from France. He felt very nervous because he'd been meeting with these same two men and trying to come to an agreement with them about a very important diplomatic decision for the last 4 months.
Right.
But so far, they had not been able to make a deal. And that was because these French representatives wanted Mohammed, who was the Director General of Egyptian Antiques, to help them put together an exhibition in Paris that was all about ancient Egypt. And they specifically wanted Mohammed to loan them a collection of artifacts from an ancient Egyptian pharaoh's tomb. But Mohammed was afraid to loan these artifacts out because he and many other people in his world believed that these particular artifacts were sacred and should not be transported outside of Egypt because it was disrespectful to the pharaoh himself.
They're weird in that part of the world,
on this
for that
particular day,
stuff.
Mohammed just said to these French representatives that, like, guys, we're never going to reach a deal because I'm just not willing to loan these out. It feels disrespectful to this pharaoh. And he knew this sounded kind of crazy because the pharaoh has been dead for thousands of years, but that's how Mohammed felt. And he really wanted them to understand that this was not something he could change. This is how he felt. That's how it is. Now, up until this point, Mohammed, again, had been trying to make a deal with them, but had never really come out and said that ultimately his main sticking point is this disrespect of the pharaoh. And so this is the first time the French representatives are hearing this. And from Mohammed's perspective, when he said this to them, it looked like they almost wanted to laugh, like, are you kidding? But when they realized Mohammed was being completely serious here, they sort of shifted and had these looks of almost sympathy come across their faces.
Yeah.
And then they promised Mohammed that, you know, if you loan us these artifacts, that's not going to be disrespectful. In fact, if anything, it would actually honor the pharaoh because it would allow people all over France to see and appreciate the artifacts from his tomb. Mohammed and the French representatives...
How's someone going to get killed in this? Is like they're going to take the artifacts out of this tomb, and what's that going to happen is like the pharaoh's going to come back to life, and it's going to come back as a mummy, and it's going to kill everybody. I've been watching too many mummy films. Brendan Fraser was great in them films. They were a good couple of films, them, actually, to be honest.
To see and appreciate the artifacts.
Their beliefs, fair enough.
Mohammed and the French representatives went back and forth on this topic for hours. And eventually, Mohammed did start to see their side of things. It did make sense to him that maybe, allowing France to display the artifacts was a way of not disrespecting the pharaoh, but honoring the pharaoh. And so finally, perhaps against his better judgment, Mohammed officially agreed to loan out the artifacts, and then the meeting adjourned. A few minutes later, Mohammed walked out of the government building onto the busy sidewalk outside. And he felt lighter than he had in months. The deal was done, and he didn't have to think about it anymore. This was great. Now, all Mohammed wanted to do was just go home. And so he began walking towards the parking lot where his car was. And as he was heading across the street, looking straight ahead, He heard a loud blaring noise and a screeching sound, and then everything went black. It would turn out those artifacts Muhammad had just agreed to loan out were from the tomb of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh king Tutankhamun.
The famous one.
Muhammad, along with many, many others, believed that these artifacts were not just sacred, but were also cursed. And that was because over the years, at least 11 people who had a connection to these artifacts had died. And it was believed that anybody who disrespected the artifacts would face King Tut's wrath. And just minutes after Muhammad convinced himself to agree to loan out these artifacts to France, he walked out of the government building in Cairo and he was hit and killed by a truck. His death made headlines all over the world because to this day, some people say this was just a horrible accident, but others insist he was yet another victim of King Tut's curse.
Oh dear. That's what happens when crossing the road and not looking. Tut tut. Hey, we're full of dad jokes today. Oh, I mean, that last one, it's probably just bad luck. Like Chris said, the guy didn't look. The guy didn't look and got hit by a truck. I mean, I still feel sorry for the guy who fell in the hole with the cave in the bottom. I mean, how unlucky can you be to survive a crash and then do that? That's some Final Destination shit. That he should have died first, so then death took over. That's what it feels like. That one. I mean, Jesus Christ, unlucky that, isn't it? What about that soldier who was like fighting a war for 30 years when the war ended for 29 of them? You just couldn't make it up, could you? I feel like Mr. Ballen gets his stories out of like Ripley's Believe It or Not or something. Because it was like everything out of there was crazy. Cairo roads, who'd have thought? Exactly, mate. Exactly. Anyway, if this is the first time, no, it's not. That's not what I'm going to say. Anyway, if you like this video, then please hit like and subscribe. If you want to support Mr. Ballen, then go and follow him. If you want to follow me, I would appreciate it very, very much. And I'll see you next time. Also, what did you think? I'm messing this ending up, but it doesn't matter because it's 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm recording this. See you next time.